talk about things that cinema and the other kinds of creation they can, how they are intersect with one with the others. And this year we do a symposium about surveillance, fiction and reality, about Big Brother, how things are now.
Very timely.
And my son, and we are here to talk with you, my son, because we do it with the in accordance and with the help with Julian Assange and Balthazar Garçon and a lot of other intellectuals, and
Close to it, be quieter. Did you have an interview with Assange?
yes, my son knows him very well, and
So you visited him?
Yeah, twice in January and May, and I should come back there.
How's he making out?
He's worse than before. It's more difficult than before, and
Getting stir crazy.
yeah, I mean he's trying to maintain a public face that is still like as
living in
usual.
such constrained
Yes,
conditions.
it's starting to be very harsh. Yeah, and embassy is starting to put more and more restrictions on the visits, etc. So, did you meet him for the interview?
Never met him. By the time I got to know him, he was already expressed.
Yes.
and what and we do it with as well with people close to Snowden, and we try to do really a reflection about how is what is the surveillance now in terms of global surveillance and everything, and how the society takes it, because I think it's we go very far than the Big Brother, and everybody is accepting that without America. And it's about all these that I think my son will do some talk with you if you don't mind.
Out of curiosity, how did people your age in Italy respond to the Snowden regulations?
I'm living in France.
Oh, you live in France? Let's say there.
It's very interesting because in the elites, so in the best universities, there is quite a debate still, in particular, less with Snowden, who has quite an accepted figure. He's an accepted figure, like he's really well considered in general. More about people like Assange, in which there's a lot of controversy about if their action is good, if they can be supported or not. There are a lot of debates and doubts. But
What kinds of criticisms come up?
They're very skeptical about the reasons he's entered this struggle into IS. And for example, it's not. For example, they consider that la raison d'etat, which is called la raison d'etat in French, can justify the fact that secrets.
You find that among
Yeah. So but really in the narrow, very elitist, and the further you go into society, deeper in the country, and the more admired they are, without compromise.
I'm asking because just small experiment with my own grandchildren, their friends, who are in their 20s. They didn't seem to care. They said, yeah, kind of interesting, but we put everything on Facebook anyway, so what do we care?
That's interesting.
It's about that, what is the discussion, how how do we arrive on that, how do we arrive in this kind of, acceptance of the society of all these control that any of us now know that we
Here, at least, the sort of teenage, 20-ish society is so exhibitionist that they just don't seem to care if anyone knows everything they're doing.
Yeah, there is also a distinction between the fact, so many young people know them even when they're not politicized, and they treat them as heroes, but it doesn't provoke any kind of mobilization.
Reaction.
Yeah, it just stays as a perception, and
I mean, were people that surprised by what was revealed?
yes,
They were.
I mean, it's the discourse of people like Assange before was seen as.
Do they follow WikiLeaks?
Yes, there is there is knowledge about this, but it was considered as a bit paranoid. All these disqualifications that can be attributed to anti-system discourse. That was, I think I don't know what you think about it, but I think that's why Snowden's revelations were so important, because it revealed that it legitimized their discourse, the discourse of those who were warning about Echelon, about these Mars surveillance.
Something that were onto something. They didn't know the least of it.
Why did you sign I mean, I saw that you signed a few weeks ago a manifest, an appeal for Snowden, to support Snowden. Why did you decide to enter into this?
Well, I started right away, immediately. I thought what he was doing was extremely important. I was quite vocal about it.
And how did you, I mean, do you see it as an American, a problem of American hegemony, or a more global problem?
To some extent or other, every government does it. Yes. So, for example, some of the interesting Snowden revelations had to do with England. Turned out that in England, the government was requesting the United States to use its advanced technology to spy on British citizens. I mean, any system of power is going to want to have total information about its enemies, and the domestic population is one of the main enemies. This goes way back. I don't know if you've studied the history, but if you haven't, a major book to look at is Albert McCoy's. Have you seen that?
Yes.
Studied Philippines.
Yes.
The United States pioneered all of these things 100 years ago. When after the U.S. conquered the Philippines, they killed a couple 100,000 people, but they had to pacify the place, and they developed using the highest technology of the day. It's not now, but they tried to gather massive information about Philippine elites. Basically, they didn't have the technology to go beyond that, and they recognized that if they knew enough information about them, they could use it to undermine organization, to discredit people, to incite conflicts among people, and basically break up the independent nationalist movements. And it was quite successful. It's so successful that if you take a look at East Asia today, Southeast and East Asia, there's a kind of famous Asian miracle, with one exception: the Philippines, which is not participating. It's been under U.S. control for a century, and it remains a dependent third world society. Has never, and furthermore, in a pretty astonishing achievement of propaganda, Filipinos have been so indoctrinated that they tend to support the U.S. and its crimes beyond other people, even though they are the main victims. That's a real achievement. And it's now over 100 years, and as McCoy discusses, as soon as these methods were developed for the Philippines, they were immediately transferred back home. So Woodrow Wilson used the same techniques in the Red Scare, the big repression in the post-World War I period. And they were picked up by the FBI, and it sort of goes on from there. The same happened in England. Systems of power are very much afraid of their own populations, and with good reason. And gaining information and using it to control people, find out what they're doing, discredit them, undermine them. That's a standard technique.
And that's a question I wanted to ask.
Incidentally, if you've read the reports in the last couple of days about these 42 Israeli intelligence agents, remember you saw that?
Yeah.
Take a look at what they're describing. The work that they were doing is exactly what
explain that, I mean, so the US has started to master this public propaganda
100 years ago.
100 years ago and have developed it since. And now they're adding to that these mass surveillance mechanisms.
Well, now they have new technology.
Yeah, that are,
any technology that's come along, they're going to use it.
and it's strengthening it. And at the same time, we can see someone like Edward Snowden, for example, that comes out alone, denouncing
It's dangerous.
these issues.
I mean, in a way, McCoy is dangerous too, but he's so obscure that they don't go after him. It's, he's a major figure in scholarship, but who knows?
But the question would be how can it be understood that someone as Snowden could counter these two massive tools that are joining together and counter the discourse, the state discourse.
Notice that he's paying quite a cost.
Yeah, of course.
Well, you remember, maybe it was a year ago or so, when Evo Morales flew to Russia to see him. The European countries are so frightened of the United States. I mean, European cowardice is unbelievable. So frightened that countries like, say, France, wouldn't allow the plane to cross their airspace for fear that the United States might be angry at them. When the plane was finally forced to land in Austria, the Austrian police sent the police in. This is a presidential plane. It's a gross violation of every imaginable diplomatic principle, but nobody complained because they're just terrified of the United States.
But at the same time, we can see that the discourse of Snowden is the discourse of Snowden, the denunciation of these methods is very pervasive and the counter discourse of the state doesn't seem to be working in the end. How can you explain that an individual?
As you said, it to some extent is working. People claim that there's an Dada justifies it. Take a look at Israel now, right now. These reservists are being denounced across the spectrum. Almost everyone. I mean, not everyone. You find the fringe. But the Labour Party is supposed to be left, whatever that means, over the right wing, they all think you ought to be killed.
But that's interesting. For example, in Israel, maybe 20 years ago, it was possible to have a public debate about this policy. And what brings that change? How can
the occupation? Actually, that was predicted right away in 1967. Right away. One of the there's a highly respected figure in Israel. It's not dead. Yeshayahu Leibovitz. But in Israel, he was a kind of sage, traditional sage, Talmudic expert, biologist, taught at university, very respected. He said, pre-reactionary, incidentally. And so he's a traditional. He belongs to traditional Jewish culture. Nothing matters except what's good for the Jews. Actually, I had interviews with him. He was bitterly condemning the occupation. And I asked him, what about the effect on the Arabs? He didn't care what happens to the Arabs. He cares about what happens to Jews. He's like my grandfather and my great-grandfather. The Goyim don't matter. But it's bad for the Jews. And what he pointed out right away is that the occupation is going to turn Israelis into what he called Judeo-Nazis. They're going to become like Nazis because when you have your boot on somebody's neck, you have to find a way to justify it. And pretty soon you make up the justifications and then you internalize the justifications and pretty soon you're a raving racist. That's what he predicted in, must have been 1967 or 68. And you can see it happening. It's the dynamics are perfectly predictable. I mean, that's what happens when you are crushing someone. You don't say, I'm a monster, so I'm going to crush them. You say, I'm doing it for their good, and they're the ones who are causing the problem. Well, the problem is that they're resisting. Otherwise, you get people like Golda Meir, his famous statement about how she hates the Arabs because they're forcing us wonderful Jews to shoot them, which we don't want to do because we're so moral. become benevolent and decent, and I'm sort of forced to do unpleasant things because they're so bad. You know?
And do you see a similar trigger moment with the U.S.? Like
The U.S. Oh, it's overwhelming. That goes way back to the origins of the society. I mean, after all, this society, the United States, was based on two fundamental principles. One is extermination of the native population, and the other was slavery. And both were justified. You take when I was growing up as a child, we would play cowboys and Indians, where we would be the cowboys killing the Indians, because we have to defend ourselves from these terrorists. Maybe they still do it. I don't know. But it's, and I was growing up in a kind of a progressive environment. But it's with regard to slavery today, you know, the problem with blacks, even Obama says this, the problem with blacks is they just have a bad culture. Why? Does it have to do with 500 years in which of slavery and its aftermath, which is really never ended? No, it's because something bad about them. You know? So that's the way you deal with it, and I think it's universal. I mean, I once, back in the 1960s, a friend of mine who worked for the Rand Corporation, you know, the government research, Tony Russo, who was later involved in releasing Pentagon Papers, a couple of years earlier, he sent me a pile of documents which were quite interesting. The Rand Corporation had translated Japanese counterinsurgency literature from the 1930s because they were interested in what their counterinsurgency techniques were. And it was pretty interesting. It was, of course, the same as the ones the U.S. was then using in Vietnam. It was kind of universal. But what was interesting about them was that I wrote about it. These are internal documents, not for the public. You know, just talk to each other. No reason to lie or anything. And they described themselves. This is a time when the Japanese were carrying out horrifying atrocities. All of them, the Naki massacre, all kinds of things in China and Manchuria. But they were describing themselves as noble, the most noble people who were trying to bring an earthly paradise to the Chinese and to defend the Chinese people against the Chinese bandits, the nationalists and of course the communists, who were trying to prevent Japan from bringing the advantages of high technology and advanced civilization to these backward people. And they were sacrificing themselves for the cause and so on. And it's the same when you read the U.S. literature, the British literature. I read a review recently in the Time, I think it was the Times Literary Supplement, you know, kind of establishment journal, by a good historian of imperialism, Bernard Porter, pretty mainstream. He was reviewing a couple of books on the British Empire up until the mid-19th century. And he pointed out that if we, the British, are ever willing to face the history of our own empire, we will rank our heroes alongside the genocidaire of the 20th century. But a long time before that will happen, we're still heroes.
And just one thing, how do you, something that for me it's very strange, is how to, you know, the acceptance by, for example, senators and congressmen now in the States, the idea that they are being controlled and nothing happens. You know, before, you know, you remember Watergate, you know, something like that, something like the kind of trying to know something, you know, from you know, in a way that he was not legal, was completely, you know, one president just fall. But now they know exactly they are being controlled, the congressmen and the senators, and they don't react at all. They just refuse to go.
If they're being controlled, it's by private corporate capital. They're not being controlled by the White House, which can't do very much to them. In fact, take a look at Watergate. Why was Watergate considered such a scandal? I mean, think about it. So Nixon was a crook. Nixon had an enemies list, which was terrible. How can he dare have an enemies list? I was on that. And nothing ever happened to him on the enemies list. But it wasn't a fuss because I was on it. It was because people like the head of IBM were on it. George Bundy was on it. And how can you call important people bad names in private? Horrible. They broke into, he had a bunch of crooks who broke into Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office. Okay, that's a crime. But is it a major crime? Take a look at what Nixon was doing at that time. Now, there were major crimes, but they didn't figure in Watergate. So right at the time that Watergate was exposed, the very same time, something else was exposed. The COINTELPRO. This is a program by the National Political Police, the FBI, through 4 administrations. Began with Eisenhower, went through Kennedy and Johnson, was still going on under Nixon. It was a program that began by a subversive, an attack on the Communist Party, then it spread to the Puerto Rican independence movement, to the Native American movement, pretty soon to the New Left, the women's movement. And it was a program just of the kind we're talking about, using every technique possible to undermine and discredit and destroy dissent. And it was pretty serious. One of the main targets was black nationalists, and they were simply massacred. Right at the time, one of the worst cases which was exposed right with Watergate, was the murder of a black ACT organizer, Fred Hampton, in Chicago, by the Chicago police, in a typical Gestapo raid, literally. The police attacked at 4 o'clock in the morning, murdered him in bed. He was probably drugged, murdered somebody else who was with him. This was all set up by the FBI. And the FBI had tried to get some other black group to kill him. They wouldn't do it, so they set it up with the police. That's a Gestapo-style assassination of somebody who's organizing the black community. I mean, that single event is incomparably worse than the whole Watergate story. I mean, I wrote about it. You know, anybody else? And in fact, even that was nothing. I mean, the worst crime of the Nixon administration was the bombing of Cambodia.
Yes.
I mean, rural Cambodia was bombed literally at the level of all Allied bombings during, and all of the entire Pacific area during World War II. Rural Cambodia. Nixon's orders, transmitted by his loyal servant, Henry Kissinger, were anything that flies against anything that moves. I mean, that's a call for genocide of a kind you just can't find in the historical record. I mean, if they found anything like that for Hitler, let's say, or for Milosevic, everybody would be overjoyed. But you can't. You can only find it for Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon. Does anybody care? No. I mean, Watergate was considered a crime because important people were mildly harmed, very mildly harmed. And mild harm to important people means the foundations of the Republic are collapsing.
And you don't think that now they feel that are being controlled by NSA as well?
How are they being controlled? I mean, am I controlled by NSA? Are you controlled? Yeah, okay, so if they want, they can pick up all my emails. Well, I don't like it, but I'm not paying any attention to it. And there's no reason for anyone in Congress to be controlled. I mean, they were controlled by the FBI, but that's long before the NSA. I mean, Hoover was using the techniques devised in the Philippines to get information about everyone in Washington. So he would get that's one of the main things the FBI was doing, trying to get information about people in the political class so you could blackmail them. You could come to a senator and tell him, look, if you do so-and-so, I'm going to, you hint, you don't tell him, oh, really hint that you'll release the fact that he's having an affair with his secretary. So then he shuts up. But that kind of scale is different, but the scale reflects the availability of the technology. If if they ever develop techniques to say pick up your brain waves, your brain produces electric signals. Maybe someday in science fiction they'll pick up a way to pick up your brain waves. Okay, we'll do that, and then blackmail you because you're thinking of something, whatever.
And you said
that's what systems of power are like. So that's why the Philippine story is so interesting and should really be studied. And that's the first modern version. I mean, it goes way back, but first modern version with the high technology of the day was the Philippines, and it's been fantastically effective. For one thing, it came back immediately to the United States and was used for the worst repression in American history, Wilson's Red Scare. But also, as I say, after 110 years, Philippines are still controlled uniquely in the region. Dramatic.
And you think that any power, that power can only, this asymmetry and mass propaganda and control of the masses is inherent to power, or do you think
it's inherent to power to try? It's not inherent to succeed. That depends on whether people resist it.
And but because you were saying before that it's a universal. You think it's a universal.
It's universal to try.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's extremely hard to find any structure of power and hierarchy and domination where those who wield the club won't try to be as effective as possible. I mean, it's not totally universal. There are people who refuse to do it, but it's a strong tendency.
And do you think individual tentatives to resist and try to subvert this?
Sure, that's what popular movements have always been about.
It starts with individuals, you think?
It starts with it's organized groups of individuals, which starts with individuals. I mean, that's how we have a lot more rights than we had 50 years ago or 100 years ago. But it wasn't gifts from above. Always popular struggle. It's true whether you're talking about abolitionism, rights of women, opposition to aggression, concern about the environment, just pick it. It's always popular activism of some sort or other.
So this popular activism, you think they should only aim at to obtain or protect rights? Or, do you think this, because there is a trend in this resistance movement, Pacific or not, to gain power in order to obtain these results? But
that's a mistake, because if they gain power, they're going to do the same.
So you think
what they ought to be trying to do is to diffuse power, so nobody has power.
So you think you can stay outside the power and still?
I think, in fact, that's been done. I mean, the transition from, say, kings to parliamentary democracy is an important step. It doesn't eliminate power, but it's parliamentary. Say the government of the United States has much less power than a king would have had 4 centuries ago.
But is this power coming to the people back or to corporations?
Controls. There are popular controls over what the government can do. There are constraints. And they work. Maybe not well, but they work. So take, say, the Vietnam War. Take a look at what happened through the 1960s. There was, at the beginning, there was almost no opposition. And it was shocking. But finally, by the late 60s, opposition developed. At that point, the Johnson administration began to run into economic problems. The problem was that they had to fight what was called the guns and butter war. They had to keep the population quiet and controlled because there was so much opposition to the war that you had to kind of keep people pacified. One result of that is they could never call a national mobilization. During the Second World War, where people were really committed to the war, there was a national mobilization. So people were willing to accept wage controls, rationing, keeping dry, to meat, and so on and so forth, because they wanted to win the war. If Johnson had been able to call a national mobilization, the Vietnam would have been totally crushed. I was practically destroyed anyway, but it would have been crushed. He couldn't do it. Too much opposition. And the result was that what was called stagflation, a combination of stagnation and inflation. The business world didn't like that. And in fact, by 1968, after the Tet Offensive, which indicated the war was going to go on for a long time, the business classes turned against the war and were influential in forcing Johnson and later Nixon into some kind of negotiation. That's the way power systems like to look at it. They say, well, business is so benevolent, they decided we shouldn't do this. No, that's not what happened. It began to harm their interests. And the reason it harmed their interests is because of popular opposition. And actually it goes beyond that. Take a look at the Pentagon Papers, which is quite interesting. One of the most interesting parts is the very end, where the Pentagon Papers ends in mid-1968 history, internal history. That's after the Tet Offensive. The Tet Offensive was a remarkable event. Among other things, it made a clear the war was going to go on for a long time. Johnson, president, wanted to send more troops to Vietnam. The top military was opposed. What they said is, if we do that, we're going to have domestic problems. We're going to need those troops for population control in the United States. There's going to be an uprising of young people and women and minorities and others, and we'll need them for civil control. And so on. Well, that's an indicator, and in fact, it was effective. What happened was horrible enough. It could have been a lot worse. Well, in fact, if you look back, say, at Nazi Germany, totalitarian state, you find pretty much the same thing. Someday, if you haven't done it, read the memoirs of Albert Speer. He's the Nazi economic czar. Yeah, 1 second. His memoirs are kind of interesting. What he says is probably accurate. He says that the military effort was impeded by the fact that the population wasn't really that too much committed to the war. So we had to carry out a guns and butter war. We had to pacify them. And that took resources away from the war. And what he claims is that I think he said that it maybe lost a year or something. I don't remember exactly. If he's right, that was the difference between victory and defeat. Germany was technologically much more advanced than the West. I mean, jet planes, rockets, all sorts of things. But they were kind of overwhelmed by sheer mass, mostly Russian. But if they had more time, who knows, maybe they would have won more. Well, that's popular opposition in a totalitarian state. Populations just can't be totally disregarded. And there are achievements, like a lot of the human rights aren't perfect by any means, but it's a big advance over the centuries.
You think that these individual, action of Snowden and Assange, not individual, the community, that will change something in the future in terms of how things sorted?
It's up to us. They did what they could. From now on, it's up to the people who got the information, thanks to their courageous actions. If you decide to do nothing, then it won't change.
In the States, nothing changed, you think, until now?
Not much. I mean, some has. So, for example, by now there are some constraints on government action. Not much, but some. And there could be more. But that's up to people like us. Same in France, same in Italy, same anywhere else. I mean, there are other governments who are doing the same things, just not on this scale.
50 years ago, you were a public enemy. Today, you were a public enemy 50 years ago. Today, Snowden is another. Even a public enemy from the inside, so it's even worse. You think there will be still another one in 50 years? You think it's a permanent?
Same answer. That's up to us.
But But you think that there can be a society in which we will not?
There can be freer societies. In fact, in an earlier period, maybe Snowden would have just been assassinated.
Yes, yeah, that's a question I wanted to ask you.
Well, I think that's changed. Like they didn't send. I mean, if he got, suppose he got, the United States is going to try to catch him in every possible way. If they do, they're not going to assassinate him. I mean, they go to prison forever.
For example. For an example.
That's an example, but mostly out of revenge.
Yeah.
A lot of it is just plain revenge. I mean, you could tell with what happened with, say, Dan Ellsbury. They tried to convict him, but the trial fell apart. And incidentally, it fell apart because of Nixon's criminality. Actually, I saw it myself. I was testifying at the trial when the judge called a recess, came back in and declared it a mistrial. And what had happened is that Nixon had tried to bribe him by offering him, I think, head of the FBI or something, and that's, he could no longer preside over the trial, so he declared a mistrial and wasn't convicted. But he wasn't murdered. However, he was punished. He has never been able to get a job. His old associates turned against him, they don't want to talk to him, and he kind of lives to hand them out. So a lot of it is revenge. You don't break ranks.
Yeah, and the question is I mean, because it's something that is under in your purpose is the question of legality or resistance to legality, or I mean, is it legitimate to go not just only as Snowden as a punctual act, but now in order to change the system, do we have to respect the frame of legality that has been imposed, or?
So the kind of null hypothesis, unless there's an argument to the contrary, you follow the laws. So if I drive home tonight and there's a traffic light that's red, I'll stop. On the other hand, if I see that across the street somebody's being murdered, maybe I'll go through it and I won't stop. Well, you do normally obey the laws unless there are reasons not to. And a lot of the laws are unacceptable. They shouldn't exist.
And so maybe we can...
And in fact, the worst lawbreakers by far are the powerful. Actually, a couple of friends and I have a letter today in the New York Times, which is pointing out the obvious, that all the discussion about whether Obama should approach Congress for authorization of the war was basically beside the point. There are higher laws, real laws, under the U.S. Constitution. Valid treaties are the supreme law of the land. The major valid treaty is the UN Charter that bans the threat or use of force. So if a law-abiding state would not even be able to discuss these issues, but a rogue state like the United States, where nobody cares about the law, they can do it.
So, yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very
for
much.
your time.